Halloween freaks a lot of Christians out, with descriptions of it being a day belonging to witches, pagans, and Satanists, celebrating ancient occult rituals. Halloween gets protested, prayed against, denounced, and called the devil's holy day, all while becoming the second largest bankable day in American culture, bringing in over $8 billion a year. Dang! So you've heard some crazy things about Halloween. I get it. There are tons of freaky videos out there designed to put you into a fear state. But what's the story, Morning Glory? Should Halloween be something that Christians are afraid of? Well, let's look at the real history. So Halloween comes from a couple of different celebrations all merged into one. Its namesake, All Hallows Eve, is actually a Christian remembrance day, the night before All Saints' Day, a time of honoring the martyrs who give their lives for the faith and Christian family members that have passed on. And this Christian holy day has been around for 1,400 years, with Pope Boniface IV recognizing Saints' Day in May of 609. And in the early 700s, the day was shifted to November 1st and was marked by a feast, so All Hallows Eve, night before. And it had a special meaning for Protestants as well. On October 31st, 1517, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a church door in Germany, condemning the corruption of the church, launching the Protestant Reformation. And Martin Luther was very precise in picking out October 31st. All Saints' Day marked one of the most attended days of the church year, as everyone came to pay their respect to the dearly departed saints. So it was a good publicity move to post his theses on All Hallows Eve. But as we all know, the origins of Halloween, as how it is celebrated most today, are from the Celtic end of harvest festivals. We don't know all the details of how these festivals began. Did they start in the Hill of Ward in County Meath, Ireland, or was it the Low Lochs of Scotland? No matter how it started, in its most ancient form, the Celtic people of the British Isles marked the end of the harvest and the bringing in of the herds, usually around the end of October, with a lot of celebration. And as the nights grew long, as they tend to do in the British Isles, and the sun rose lower in the sky, this festival time was considered a not time. Not summer, not winter. A time where the veil between the physical world and the other world was thinnest, and spirits were now free to be able to move to the other world. The problem with this thin veil between worlds was, however, is that it was a two-way street, and spirits that had already passed the veil could come back through. So to confuse evil spirits, or those that people had wronged that had passed on, people wore disguises to avoid being recognized. And it was also thought that since the veil was the thinnest at this time, magical powers would be at their height, aiding in divination and rituals. Now, when the Romans invaded Britain 2,000 years ago and conquered the southern Celtic tribes, they brought with them the festivals of Feralia and Pomona. And after the Romans left Britain in the 4th century, many of their religious customs remained, infusing the local cultures with added tradition. And by the 10th century, we have the first mentions of this Celtic festival as Samhain. It's not Sam Hain, folks. It's Samhain. And Samhain marks the beginning of the darker half of the year between fall equinox and winter solstice. And this was a 3-day event, the division of the days of light, summer, and the days of dark, winter. And harking back to its roots, these 3 days of when the division between the world and the other world were thinnest, allowing spirits to move through, and the traditions of wearing disguises to ward off harmful entities, they came back around. And this is also where the carving of gourds and eventually pumpkins begins to frighten these darker spirits. Samhain was a rich time of taking personal inventory of life, and sometimes it included animal sacrifice to the gods to both feed the community and to ensure safety during the winters. And some customs, supposedly calling back to the ancient Druidic rites, went so far as to build these huge bonfires. And after the bonfires began to burn low, the people would bring a piece of that flame home to bless their houses and light their hearths, just as they did in the ancient days. Now, as the Catholic Church spread into Britain big time in the 11th and 12th centuries, traditions began to commingle. In medieval England, solars would go around begging the wealthy for soul cakes on Hallows Eve, and instead of threatening to play tricks, they'd pray for people's souls in return for the cake. Throughout medieval Europe, mummering, dressing in disguises and visiting neighborhoods while dancing and playing music and doing tricks, that was very popular too. By the time of the Reformation in the 16th century, reformers, particularly Puritans, nixed these types of communal celebrations. But make no mistake, they were still celebrated on a smaller scale, especially in the country where traditions die hard. And when the Puritans came to America, along with every other holiday celebration, Halloween was forbidden. But as more European immigrants arrived, especially the Irish, Halloween caught new life in the United States. And where once Hallows Eve was equated with spooky stories and ghosts and all that stuff, in the States, these Halloween nights became the focus of commercial entities. In 1917, the phrase trick or treat popped up in Canada, and in the 1930s in the US, that's when mass production of costumes hit the big time. And as time has gone on, here we are, a yearly $8 billion industry just in the US of A. But, interesting thing, there wasn't a whole lot of equating it with the actual devil until the mid to late 1960s. Up till then, the biggest complaint was people getting mad at Halloween pranks or not liking scary stories. But the 1960s brought the countercultural movement. Witchcraft hit the mainstream, and with that, the reclamation of Halloween as a pagan holiday. And while most witches just wanted to be left alone to worship as they pleased in private, this was kind of scary to people who didn't understand what witchcraft was all about. And then a fella came along who knew the power of publicity. Anton Szandor LaVey, the showman, the founder of the Church of Satan, and he loved to poke the rising evangelical movement to draw attention to himself. After all, fear is a powerful motivator, and when paired with showmanship, which LaVey had loads of experience in as a performer organist in bars and lounges and nightclubs and theaters in the 40s and 50s, match, gasoline. Also, P.S., the Church of Satan has absolutely nothing to do with modern Wicca movements or anything like that, by the way. Just putting that out there. Another subject for another time. But Anton LaVey said either by wearing a costume or coloring oneself up for Halloween is tantamount to worshiping the devil. He said, "I am glad that Christian parents let their children worship the devil at least one night out of the year. Welcome to Halloween." Bad impression. But with that, the satanic panic of the 1980s, that's all it took. Now Halloween is known as Satan's holiday among many in the Christian church. And it doesn't help that media has really taken off with this thing with all of its horror imagery. And now very few Christians know its connection to the Christian festival of All Saints, or the Reformation. Its attachment to Martin Luther, the founder of the Protestant movement. But here's the bigger thing. For those who say October 31st is Satan's Day or Evil's Day, number one, by looking through its history, I hope you see that this is a fairly new phenomenon that started in the 1960s. Second, I ask you to find in the Bible where it says that any day belongs to Satan. Psalm 118:24 says, "This is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it." There's no day given to Satan. This is a completely modern invention, and believing something like that is kind of empowering a being that to believers shouldn't hold any real power anyway. You're surrendering something to Satan that doesn't belong to him. Now, should Christians celebrate Halloween? Now that's up to you. That's a personal thing. I'm not going to judge you on that. This is just a video letting you know where Halloween actually comes from and how there's no such thing as a devil's day. There's just not. Doesn't exist. Unless Christians want to just give it to them. But that's kind of silly. But I do know this, dear Christian. You shouldn't be afraid. For you haven't been given a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and of sound mind. And perfect love casts out all fear. And maybe this day where people say evil reigns and all that kind of stuff, maybe this presents a beautiful opportunity to reach out to others with not scorn and suspicion and fear, but with the love of Jesus. I don't know, maybe the light shines brightest in the darkness thing is actually true. Just a thought. God bless.